Hey everyone, happy Monday. It's another great week here at Techstrong. We've got a lot to go over today. How smart will AI get? OpenTofu, an open war with HashiCorp, it seems. And what's going on with DevSecOps and the Cyber Resilience Act? All this and more on Techstrong, gang. Hey everyone, welcome to Techstrong Gang on this fine Monday. Let me introduce you to our gang members for today. First of all, joining us remotely, again, from the Mile High City, our CTO and Chief Research Officer, Mitch Ashley. Hey Mitch, welcome, hope all's well.
Hey, good to see everybody. Well, hello from the Mile High City.
Yeah, and also joining us from out west, New Mexico style, our frequent gang member guest, Tracy Ragan. Hey, Tracy, how are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here. It's always fun.
Always fun. And then here in studio at our Boca Raton, Florida headquarters, the ultimate Yankees fan, sporting his Yankees shirt. Well, they're off to a good start. We'll talk to me after July 4th, the All-Star break. We'll see if he's still wearing it. Mike Vizard. Hey, Mike.
Hey, guys. How's everybody doing? You got to represent, man.
You got to. Look, they're doing well. They're playing Cleveland, and we'll see what's happening. Anyway, so we've got a busy Monday, as usual. Mike, you want to kick things off?
Sure, I'd love to. Last week, I had the pleasure of going out to the Google Cloud Next conference out in Las Vegas with about maybe 20,000 of my closest friends. And it was interesting to watch the evolution of AI, and I'd love to get your folks' opinion about this. But what seems to be happening is we're rapidly moving past the platform is going to generate some code or create an article to where it's actually orchestrating tasks. And the way that that's occurring is that there's reasoning engines are putting inside the LLM are able to coordinate things. So you'll be able to soon say, I don't know, build me a website, and it will order those tasks, create the code, and then execute them, and then you can tailor it accordingly. And there's a bunch of startups in the cybersecurity space doing similar things. There's an outfit called Symbian who has built their own LLM, and it pretty much does the same thing for cybersecurity tasks. So the question then becomes, how smart do we think AI is about to get? And I'll start with Tracy, but are we on the cusp of some changing roles for the way we think about our jobs? Because it seems to me a lot of our effort will be automated, and maybe we'll just be a bunch of supervisors for all this stuff. But where are we headed, Tracy?
I hope that's the case. I'm going to say that right off. Because, I have spent most of my career trying to convince people to stop scripting. Seriously, we are, we're software developers. We create the most interesting software in the world. We automate banking, we automate trading, we automate medical processing. Yet we can't figure out how to get rid of a script that does a DevOps process. Come on, it's time. It's totally time that we get rid of the scripting process. And what we're seeing from Google and their, especially around DevOps, is let's stop scripting. Let's just let something else do that, because scripting is really a low-level function, and I don't believe that any DevOps engineer should be spending time doing it. And that's just how I've always felt about scripts. And I'm glad to see that we're finally going, to be honest, these scripts. OpenMake Software, that my previous company, we had a rules-based engine that generated make and and scripts. So it's way doable. This technology has been doable for quite some time, and it's great fun to put AI in front of it and say, it's something new. It's a cultural shift that AI is bringing into the picture, and it's going to allow us to get rid of some of these really mundane tasks that cause a lot of errors, because humans make mistakes in mundane tasks. So let a machine do it.
Tracy, part of my heart hurts to hear you say we shouldn't be scripting anymore. I just don't know how to respond to that. But I do understand why you're saying it, which is we don't need scripts to do everything like we have been, right? Like you said, we have already had tools to do scripting for us. And now, obviously, that's where the role of this Gemini Cloud Assist, taking the Copilot idea one layer further, which is good to see. We're moving out of the IDE and into kind of more the management console or the process of what's happening. So I would imagine the tasks that you can give it or ask it to do or code up something or automate something for you, however it does it, will get more sophisticated over time. It's good to see us move into this era. And Symbion's also an interesting company. They have the model of, it's manual now, then you do Copilot, then we automate it, and then autonomous. That's sort of the Danger Will Robinson phase.
Yeah.
I understand that attachment. I really do understand the attachment to scripting. I had one person when I was going off at a conference once about scripting and how we need to get away from it. He came up to me and he said, I take pride in my scripts. I feel like I am I'm the shoe cobbler making the perfect shoe. And my response to him was, yes, and your children never have them.
That's funny.
So that is the problem. It takes too long.
So I'm listening to this, and I've got a couple of thoughts on this whole subject. There's no surprise. But first of all, I'm reminded of the old Who song, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So what we're saying is, instead of humans doing scripts, let's let AI do the scripts. Right? And AI will write the scripts better. Okay, so we'll have AI write the scripts better. But overall, though, when we say things like how smart will AI get, we're not really talking about smart in my mind, because when I hear how smart will AI get, I'm thinking, are we reaching general intelligence? Are we getting to the Skynet point and SkyMaster, whatever the heck it's called, point? What we're really seeing here is the continued evolution of the Gen AI technology that we saw come out about a little over a year now ago, with OpenAI and then the commercials, out into the open. But this is what we thought it was going to do. It was going to continue taking these baby steps and piecing this stuff together and getting better. I think what surprises us is that at the speed of the evolution, at the speed of, I'm going to show my age, but how many people remember the Andromeda Strain?
Oh, right? One of my favorite movies.
What a great movie that was, right? And if you haven't watched it, go watch it somewhere it must be available somewhere.
It is.
For free on YouTube or something. But anyway, the thing about the Andromeda Strain was that alien bug or whatever, virus, it started, the replication sped up so much as it was like continuously evolving in rapid time. We're saying the same thing with this AI, is it's continuously evolving in a faster and faster and a more condensed time frame. So yes, it's doing, tasks like that. I had a chance, it's intern season. We've got a lot of people calling us here at Techstrong to do internships. And one of the questions I've been asking the interns is, hey, you're in college right now. You want to be in marketing. You want to be in coding. You want to be in tech, or you want a job, right? How do you think AI is going to impact by the time you graduate school? And some of these people are juniors, sophomores going to juniors, rising seniors.
Well, now you're just scaring them.
Well, no, I want to make
not nice
sure.
to be mean to the kids, Alan.
I'm not being mean. I want to, because the answer I'm looking for is, it's not going to replace me, but I'm going to use it to be better, right? I'm going to be the jockey on this horse. It's not riding me or making me up, sending me to the to the horse meat factory.
Glue factory.
Or the glue factory, yes. I never understood the glue factory thing. It was just the hoofs
That's
that
where
make
they
glues
went
out of.
back in the day.
But anyway, I think that right there is the key.
I think as we go forward, everybody's going to have their own, really a digital assistant. And that assistant's going to be a lot smarter than you think. And it's going to be able to do things for you that previously you would have thought, well, let me call, this one, that one, that one, and that one, and I'll orchestrate all this stuff. And, sometime in about 4 months from now, I'll get it. It's going to be more like, a couple hours, I'm going to get it. What's going to be interesting to me is, the cultural side of this is, well, let's say we can all spin up a website in half a day or whatever it's going to be. Well, if you do it, I do it, and we're all working in the same company, we kind of have to figure out how to align that a little bit. And so there's going to be cultural issues around how we make all our digital assistants kind of come together and collaborate. We're going to have to find ways to check the output for all of that, since some of it might wind up being redundant, some of it might be even conflicting. So we got to figure out all these cultural issues. And to me, that's starting to become the bigger story. I mean, I think the technology side of this equation is being solved rapidly, but I'm not sure that we have actually thought through all the cultural implications.
Absolutely.
I agree.
I think
the cultural issues are, that's where it's at. It's us being able to adopt it and understand it.
I think of the cultural issue also of when does AI move past a single person's use? A single user, AI is in the IDE and helping you do your one thing. Well, how do you do a website when 6 people are working on it, right? And AI is working with you to help create that. So we are all creating the same but different websites. By the way, I'm claiming it here. I've looked and I haven't seen anybody use this term, so I'm officially going to make it one that I came up with, even if I didn't. But in the Bruce Willis genre, the Aerosmith genre, we have a new term for this dystopian state. It's now called AI-mageddon.
Okay, is that a Christmas movie?
That is, yes, yeah.
But so. How long, though? So even having an AI assistant, there's a very thin line between being an assistant, a manager, and then ruling you, right? And at what point do we start needing sort of Asimov's rules of robotics here to put parameters and stops around how much that AI helps you? And did we wind up, what was the movie where humans were just fat blobs sitting in chairs on a spaceship and kind of the robots and the AI?
Every science fiction movie you ever saw.
No, but I think it was WALL-E or Wall-E or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It was WALL-E. And, how long until we reach WALL-E mode? Or not WALL-E World, that's a different movie. But I think that's...
the technology is going to skyrocket. I like to call it applied AI, because now when we write software, we can begin sorting out these different basically algorithms and AI models that we could potentially incorporate into building solutions. But I don't know if we're going to be there in our lifetimes where that machines are taking over. I don't really believe that will happen, and maybe it could. And maybe machines will take over a lot of the mundane things that we don't want to do. I wouldn't mind I want a robot like in Lost in Space. I want one of those robots that can pick heavy things up. It can clean my house.
Robbie the robot.
That'd be awesome.
I like the more benign robot of the Jetsons. She's a house cleaner.
The manic depressive robot.
Yeah, I mean, the robot in Lost in Space can go either way.
So I would say there's 2 issues that have not been addressed here, right? One is we do tend to overly rely on the machine, and we trust that machine because somehow or other we think it's convincingly telling us something, and we all know people in our lives who convincingly tell us things that are routinely false. So we need to trust and verify. We
need to go into politics, Mike.
We need the Ronald Reagan doctrine here for close. AI.
Trust but verify?
Yep.
And then you mentioned the Andromeda Strain, which is a Michael Crichton book and movie. I think it was the first movie made out of one of his books. What's interesting, that, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched it by now, it's still worth watching, even I'll give you the spoiler alert. What happens is the virus or the cell ends up replicating and changing itself so much it becomes benign instead of being dangerous. Maybe that's a possible path for AI too. Maybe it becomes dangerous and it keeps evolving and becomes benign as well. We don't know what
but do we survive that is the question.
We may not be around to see it, but
our pets will enjoy it.
We have seen the dangers of AI, right? If it's true about the targeting of the World Kitchen volunteers, if that was something that was pushed through an AI process, and as Mike pointed out, we may have trusted, but there was no verification, then we as humans have to acknowledge that there can be danger in AI, depending on how it's applied. It's obviously in war, it can be extremely dangerous. And how do we as humans, from a cultural perspective, start using AI and put the correct guardrails around it?
And to that point, we also have to figure out how to debug these issues when they do arise, because sometimes this stuff is so complex that it's not clear to me we're going to know exactly how it went wrong.
You know, I think a good analogy for this is the whole autonomous driving thing. You know, the autonomous driving capability in software has really advanced, let's say, over the last 7 years, right? But it's kind of like when we subscribe transcripts. 90% sounds great. Wow, 90%. But then 9 out of 10 words are good. 1 out of 10 words aren't good. 500-word article, 50 words aren't good. Allowing AI to automate cybersecurity is great until it's not, right? Because 90% is not good enough. 99% may not be good enough. So the question becomes, what is the acceptable threshold of AI control, automation, whatever you want to call it, that we're willing to say, okay, let's turn it over to the AI?
I think there's a whole area where I don't think we've explored enough either, and that is, how do you recreate what AI did, especially in generative AI, since it's non-deterministic in its outcomes. So if we did have something bad happen, like you were talking about, Tracy, can you truly go back and look and see what actually caused it, right? When the same outcome may not be the same every time. Or maybe we need another governor in AI that says, I need you to be consistent. I need you to come up regularly with the one answer that you think is the best answer, not lots of answers that might be good.
Fair enough. Hey, guys, the AI is telling me we've gone on long enough on this subject, and I've got to cut it right now. But thanks for talking to us on this one. We're going to take a quick break on Techstrong, gang, and we're coming back with some OpenTofu.
Welcome back, everybody. It may come as a shock and a surprise to you, but there's lawyers involved in software disputes. And
lawyers, guns, and money.
All right. The latest one involves Terraform, which they changed some of the licensing terms over at HashiCorp, and they didn't, on the face of it, look extensive, but it seems like they are having quite the downstream impact on a lot of folks out there. And that led to a fork being created called OpenTofu, and naturally, it was probably only a matter of time, but some letters have been exchanged, and the HashiCorp folks are claiming that the folks who forked Terraform to create OpenTofu might have lifted some code that they shouldn't have, even though theoretically it's supposed to be all open source code. So who knows? And OpenTofu last week said we did not do so, and now the case proceeds from there. But let's start with Tracy. You've been involved in these kinds of cases before. Is this kind of just an effort to thwart a competitor, or is there something more real here?
It's a shift that's not happy in my world. If we think about it, Terraform was always owned by HashiCorp. It was a project that was never contributed to any kind of an open source foundation. So, they had it under, I think it was the Mozilla license. And then at some point, they decided to use the BSL, the business source license. And in a way, that BSL is more like an escrow account, right? It says, here's the source code. If you ever need to use it, you can use it internally to fix your version if you choose to do so. But it's limited in terms of you can't create a company around it. So it is restricting competition. What I didn't like about that was it was an open source project. It's like, what are we going back to, England in the 1200s? Where we had lords asking people to do things at, on pennies on what they were making and not get to the benefit of potentially using it in something that they may want to take to market. Now, it got forked by a group of people. HashiCorp is a member of Linux Foundation and CNCF, but that doesn't mean the project was a part of the Linux Foundation and CNCF. So while I believe that if you want to work on an open source project, I think this teaches us to be careful and don't go work on an open source project for a company who's going to maintain that code and do what they want with it. It should be brought to an Apache or a Linux Foundation. But at the same side, I don't know if the Linux Foundation should be moving forward with OpenTofu because they never actually own the code. And when, it's hard because did they fork it before it went to the BSL, or was it during its Mozilla period? When did that fork occur? So I think it's going to open up a really interesting lawsuit if that's where it ends up. But we at Deploy Hub and the Ortelius team, we were using Terraform. We went away from it, and we didn't go to OpenTofu for this reason, because we don't know what the result will be. And I would say if I'm using an open source product, I would want to use it from a foundation that is managing open source projects, because they protect the open source contributor in this way.
So I've got a lot of experience in this, going back 25, 30 years. Mitchell lived this with me at Still Secure. You start messing with licensing of software, open source software, and them's their fighting words to the open source community, even if it is relatively benign like the BSL is. But the BSL, if I'm not mistaken, Tracy, only sort of paying customers can start playing with the code. I don't think free users were allowed to play with the code, even just for their own benefit. Right. And, part of an
that
open
may be the
source.
case.
Yeah. And part of an
That's
open
like
source license.
Yeah.
Part of an open source license, too, is that any changes you make, you have to contribute back generally into the community. And then the open source maintainers decide whether they want to make that part of the mainstream, or it's just sort of an appendage hanging out there. That being said, though, look, we didn't always have foundations ruling open source software, right? There was what I call the big brother era of open source, let's say from 2000 till 2012, or in that period, where generally most open source projects were supported and basically run lock, stock, and barrel by a single vendor. In Mitchell and my's time, the big examples of this in security were Snort, which was Marty Resch and the folks at SourceFire, versus Tenable Security, Ron Guler and Renaud Tresson of Mitchell. What's Tenable? Nessus. Now, Nessus was always open source up in I think through version 2.7. And then at 2.7, Ron and Renaud said, you know what, it's no longer going to be open source. It'll still be free, but you don't get the source code. And you can use it free in only certain parameters or whatever. The world exploded, much like we're seeing here with OpenTofu, right? Everybody was up in arms. There was a fork made. I think the fork is called OpenVAS, V-A-S. I think it might even still be out there. The fact is that code, once you release code under open source, anybody could take that code and run with it, right? So if the OpenTofu group takes the last version of Terraform that was released under the open source license and makes the fork from that point on. And we've had forks, right? Hudson to Jenkins is probably one of the most famous. But so if they fork from that code base, they can run any way they want, and it remains open source, and there's no repercussions, there's no legal ramifications or anything. What's going on in this case, though, that made it a little different was, number one, OpenTofu was adopted by CNCF Linux Foundation as a project, which gave it a stamp of approval against a corporate, going against the interests of a corporate member of the foundation. And that is where foundations get a little sticky, because politics come into play. Number two, though, the claim here is not that they did that. Of course, you could fork an open source version. But what HashiCorp is saying, and by the way, this whole BSL thing has turned into a slight disaster for HashiCorp. Right? Mitchell Hashimoto left HashiCorp in December. They got real corporate people running it. Rumor is they've hired bankers to start selling the company. or shopping the company, and the community is up in arms with them about this move, though I feel if they just would have kept their heads down, it would have blown over. But anyway, the claim by HashiCorp is that OpenTofu didn't just take the last open source version and fork it, that there was a piece of code that was specifically put in after the open source after the switch of licenses. And that piece of code found its way into OpenTofu. Now, the OpenTofu people said, BS. That code was not from before, or was not from after the license change, and it's not in there, and they've said a bunch of things. Friend of mine, and Mitchell as well knows, and it's Tracy, I don't know if you know Matt Assay. Matt, long-time open source guy. I've been talking with Matt since I was writing at Network World on open source fact and fiction 15 years ago. Matt claims, and Matt knows what he's talking about, Matt claims that the code in question was put in after the change in license, and that OpenTofu did probably use code that was put in after the license code change. And if that's the case, they got to take that out, clean room up a new module to replace that, and that's how you get, that's the only way to go forward here.
Tracy, how hard?
OpenTofu has responded and said, here's the file before they had that code in it. But they made some kind of loose reference to similar or like code, or it wasn't like word for word. This is, letter for letter, the code that was before the license and after. So it sounds like Matt may be right, but there's certainly some gray area in what happened with this. We don't know yet.
Tracy, how hard is it to replace that code? And is this going to wind up being a proverbial tempest in a teapot once the code's replaced?
Well, I think it depends on how deep that code is. If the code is something at a lower level that a lot of all the other functionality depends on, it's going to be a challenge to take it out and to replace it where it doesn't look the same, right? Because that's the whole point. You have to make it has to function differently. You can't just change the way it's written.
Tracy, if it was in fact put in after the license change, I don't think it's going to be that hard because it's really relatively recent.
Unless it was a fix for something lower level. But if it's something at the higher level, it shouldn't be a big deal to take out.
Right.
But you know what, Alan? I don't know for sure if Terraform was ever a CNCF project, was it? I know HashiCorp was part of it.
Terraform wasn't. HashiCorp.
Terraform, right.
HashiCorp was a sponsor, member, active participant in LF and CNCF.
Yes.
I don't think they ever donated their...
I don't think they did either, which also complicates this puzzle.
Yeah, it's a political issue. That becomes politics, right? How much money is HashiCorp paying as a sponsor, and how much influence does that buy them? Yeah, and that's exactly a question here.
And Linux Foundation never owned the open source projects in the first place. It was always owned by Terraform or HashiCorp, and they had every right to change the license over without having any impact to anyone.
I don't think anyone is denying Hashi the right to change their license, though open source users, as I said, that's fighting words to them. We saw this in Nessus.
Yeah, it's kind of a snotty thing to do, to be quite honest.
Yeah, no,
you did all this work, and now we're going to make sure nobody can use it.
So at the time Tenable did this, I was clearly on the side of you, just like you, Tracy. You don't do that. It's not right, blah, 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 blah. Over the last 20 years, I've had a chance to be really good friends with Ron Guler, and I respect Ron and his wife Cindy and everything they do. And I've talked about this with Ron while watching... he's a big Baltimore Ravens fan. While watching football, some Ravens games, him and I sat and talked about it. What was the reason behind it for Tenable, and I suspect it's the same thing around Hashi, is that there were most of the vulnerability scanners on the market at the time, including our scanner at Still Secure called VAM, that Mitchell and I were two of the three co-founders on, were actually using Nessus under the covers. That was the scanning engine. right? And almost the entire vulnerability industry was built on Nessus under the covers. That was the scanner.
Same thing happened with Snort for
same thing with Snort for IDS IPS. Yeah. That was the IDS IPS under the covers. And Ron was saying, hey, all these companies, not only are they not paying us, they're competing with us using our own product that I'm paying money to keep up and maintain and continue developing. It's wrong. And HashiCorp, I think, has the same thing. Now, if you want to see a different way of dealing with that issue, look at SourceFire, Marty Resch and the SourceFire team. They never made Snort not open source. Snort remained open source, and they continued developing it. But what they did is they took a razor blade model. The engine of Snort was open source, but the rules, right? Your Snort rule set that recognized, malicious software and so forth. They said that wasn't open source. That was proprietary stuff. And if you wanted to use the rule set, you had to pay SourceFire, or you could get it free, but there was like a month delay from when they put it out until you can get it. And for whatever reason, the open source community was good with that. Similar thing to Nessus. Nessus is only as good as the NASL scripts that identify key vulnerabilities. Ron could have kept the Nessus engine open source and just made money off the NASL scripts. But people can write their own NASL scripts, as we did. We set up an operation in India that wrote our own NASL scripts, and we continued to use the old open source engine of Nessus. Other people were writing their own Snort rules.
Mitchell, put your CTO hat on for a second. When you see these types of licenses and you see the level of noise that gets generated by them, are you just going to run away from certain terms and conditions and licenses because you know that there's going to be trouble down the road? And so, does this become a bigger factor in your decision about what software you're actually going to use? I mean, Tracy alluded to this at the top of the segment here, where she was saying, she looked at all that stuff and deliberately decided to shy away from it.
I think it's an eyes wide open you have to take, which is there are different models we've talked about with open source. There are, a consortium or group sponsored projects. There are company sponsored projects. There's in the basement of my house projects kind of things. And you not only want to look at the license, but look at who's contributing, who's developing, who's supporting. And these kind of disputes are more rare. I think they're pretty rare. They don't happen that often. Part of it is because most of the industry operates on goodwill, even to the point of, some people see it as, I only work with companies that get it about open source, right? They truly support open source and the model and how all of that works versus I use this word, it's not my word, but the profiteer who's kind of using open source sorta, but they're not really an open source company. They're just putting out a version of something that's open source. So I think this is going to be a wrinkle that goes away. They said stop and to see with what you're doing with OpenTofu. Well, it'll have to get worked out what happened and how do we fix it, right? They're not going to stop OpenTofu unless it's some widespread thing that they copied a whole bunch of stuff and that accusation shouldn't be made. So I think you just have to look at who am I putting my trust in? Am I putting in something that's foundation supported? Is it a vendor supported? Okay, I know that. I'm going in eyes wide open. Or is it Mitch in his basement and his friends, or maybe just even him, which is kind of what those Snort and Nessus were, kind of really individual people doing it.
And I think there's a broader conversation, though, that this is creating, and that is about how to start a company. Can you monetize open source? If you're like Deploy Hub and you contribute 80% of your code base, held back a certain section that you can monetize on, but does that make that less valuable, right? When we have these kinds of rifts, from a legal perspective, it does cause concern for products and companies that are built on open source. And to be quite honest, open source wouldn't exist without companies like a Deploy Hub who are contributing code and creating a marketplace for open source code and monetizing on additional features that we can add to it. So part of this discussion is a cause for concern for companies like mine that are living in the open source world and believe in it and have a heart for it. And if HashiCorp didn't have a heart for it in the first place, they should have always used a BSL. They should have never, ever open sourced it in the first place, because you have to be committed behind it. You have to be committed to your community.
So I think HashiCorp would say they are committed to their community, and their community are people who help support them. They're a commercial project. They're also committed to their shareholders and investors and employees to keep the lights on.
That is the problem. That becomes the problem,
that's
right?
That's the issue. Money always is the root of all evil. But here's the bigger question on this, or the bigger issue that really we haven't touched on. I mentioned before the big brother era of open source, and now we're in the foundation era of open source. And before that, this is my own stuff. I don't, like Mitchell said before, I've been using this, though, for a long time. Before the Big Brother era, I think we were in the Cathedral and Bazaar era, if you've ever read that book. Great book. Where you had Dr. Stallman's view of down with the man and kill the pigs and everything should be free and open. I think we are passing out of this golden era of foundational open source that was kumbaya, everybody, we're going to give everybody a base, and then you build on top of that base, and that's how you difference yourself from your competition. I think the issue is a lot of companies are realizing it's really hard to make a go of it when 96% or 97% of the people using the code don't give you a dime, and 95% don't contribute in any way whatsoever, that other companies take the code that you're contributing to and become competitors, and they've got shareholders and investors and employees to answer for. And it's not just HashiCorp. Red Hat themselves.
Red Hat did this too.
Red Hat themselves have changed their licensing on RHEL. There's any number of companies that are really starting to review this now. And that was always the big boogaloo about adopting open source in the enterprise. Who am I gonna call? Is someone going to pull the rug out from under me? And this is something, this one will get easily handled because I think it's a very isolated piece of code that's going to be taken out of the OpenTofu distribution, and the OpenTofu people will have a clean room reversion replacement for it. I've seen it happen before. Bigger issue is, do open source business models work in the next era? Right? When AI starts writing your code, what's the open source license behind that? There's any number of things. You go to KubeCon and you see how crowded it is, and it's great. How many of those companies become successful from a financial point of view because they all can't? And I think we're seeing that come through too. I think we might be moving into the next era, a post-foundational era of open source, where companies who like deploy Hub Tracy have to do what's best for your investors and your employees in terms of, and you got to balance that with what's best for the community, because what's best for the community isn't always best for the software provider. With that being said, though, we beat this to death. Let's take a break on Techstrong, gang. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back to the third block, and we're going to be talking about what's going on with all these different consortiums because, well, it's the next logical topic. But we've seen, love it or hate it, that the EU has this Cyber Resilience Act, and it has arguably some prescriptive requirements for what you can do with securing your open source software supply chain or software in general. And the Eclipse Foundation is now saying that they're going to create a framework someday soon, I guess, to help people execute that. But the challenge is we also see the Linux Foundation has OpenSSF and all kinds of different consortiums that are running around. And frankly, Tracy, I'll come to you, but I get a little confused as to what consortiums do and what. Do we have too many consortiums, and do we need to figure out maybe a way to play nicer together?
I think so. There are so many different kind of groups of the giants that have decided that they're going to take this on and solve the problems. I really do feel, even within the OpenSSF, I feel there should be more collaboration across all the working groups, much less all these other consortiums that are discussing this particular problem. It's a big problem, though. Everybody should take their piece of the puzzle and solve that piece of the puzzle. And I don't necessarily know if that's happening because I can't keep track of what everybody's up to. What the Eclipse Foundation is trying to do is address it at the development state. What the OpenSSF is trying to do just to secure open source software. There's other groups that are looking at creating standards. There's the Secure Software Development Framework. There's the cybersecurity. NIST has their cybersecurity framework. It's a lot. It's a lot to try to keep track of. The Cyber Resiliency Act, I haven't read through it in close detail, but a lot of this has been pushed or spurred on by the number of vulnerabilities we're finding. Well, they've always been there. The reason why it feels worse today is because we're recognizing the vulnerabilities. We're seeing them. We're starting to talk about them. So it feels like suddenly everything got worse really fast. Well, it's been bad for a while, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't fix it. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying all of this buzz is because we're seeing more vulnerabilities because we have tools that are exposing them better, which means that we're achieving what we're being asked to achieve by things like the Cyber Resiliency Act. We are looking at ways to harden the software, supply chain. We're looking at ways to harden our architecture and our frameworks. So yes, we should have these standards, but is this something that the world is on fire right now? Well, maybe it is, but it has been for several years. So I feel like we all just need to breathe, take a breather, look at what silos that we are good at and fix those areas of expertise. And I don't necessarily know if that's what's happening. I feel sometimes that each consortium wants to boil the ocean.
Hi, I'm here. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. I think this is a perfect example where if industry doesn't police itself and the government gets involved, you're going to have not chaos, but you're going to have this
suboptimal
kind of
outcome.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Well, in Yiddish, they have a word mishigas. It means like trouble. You're going to have this mishigas.
It's snafu in English.
And then complicating it, it's not just the U.S. government and CISA and the White House, but you have the EU. And the EU, they're a lot more aggressive because they have political will to get things done. But what we got to remember are the people writing the legislation, they're not open source experts. They get pulled and pushed and stretched from special interest groups, as much of government is today. And so what you get is below suboptimal. Look, software supply chain security is DevSecOps, right? I think our DevOps Next, DevSecOps Next report is going to really reflect on that. And the fact of the matter is, in terms of adoption by the industry at large, by, not consumers, but developers of code, who I guess are the consumers, it's not as high as we thought it was, right? I'm not giving out any secrets yet, but I will tell you that our research is showing it's not as widespread as we had hoped or thought. And that's really the issue. But do we need Big Brother coming in and saying you can't release software that has any known vulnerabilities in it? That's a bit of a bridge too far for me. It's just an impossible, because every software probably has vulnerabilities. It's just a question of when we know about them, when they're exploitable and everything else. Trace, to your point, I would like to see us come together in a broader industry and maybe even in partnership with governments to have a single rule or a single set of rules. I think we're in this Tower of Babel kind of thing that we are now, where everybody's making their own stuff, hoping that they'll somehow coordinate is pie in the sky.
I think the airline industry went through this a couple of decades ago, where they all got together and created safety engineering principles that they all follow. And there's, of course, still issues that pop up every now and again, but the plane's not dropping out of the sky kind of thing. So it at least not as frequently as it used to, if you're old enough to remember. And I think we need to do something similar. I don't know, Tracy.
I think that there should be a conversation between DevOps engineers and security engineers or CISO offices, because we're asking. I see so much of what that's being produced. It says the developer has to fix it. The developer has to fix it. The developer's not going to fix it. To be quite honest, developers come out. They're our lowest level in terms of the technology in a company. You bring an engineer in from college. They start coding, and now they're doing, microservices. They're kind of insulated to their own little service. They're not thinking about security across the entire life cycle. They're just not doing it, and it's unfair to ask that persona to do the work. Now, I was so with you, Alan. This is a DevSecOps puzzle. This is evolving our DevOps pipelines to include security in that process. And there is the one reason why we can't do it easily is because of scripts.
Yeah. No.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of scripts that we have that we have to go and it's the scripts is the problem. I keep saying that. We have all these scripts we have to go and update. You can't go update. Jenkins is doing CloudBeans Jenkins. They support 90 million workflows a month. Are we going to go and update every single one of those manually? No, we're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. There's got to be a way to do this in an automated way, and we'll bring AI in. We have to have the AI intelligence to start helping us with that. But it is a DevSecOps problem. It's a problem between the CISO office, the security engineers, the security teams, and the DevOps teams. That's the two personas that need to fix this problem. Developers certainly should have tools to do proper scanning and have maybe a little more knowledge about open source that they're bringing in. But even then, they can't know everything. It's impossible for them to know everything. So it has to be done through the DevOps pipeline. There is no other place for it. And DevOps has to evolve to DevSecOps, period.
I feel like Charlton Heston standing on the top of the truck yelling, "Scripts is code. Scripts is code."
I don't know. I think you're wrong about that. Money is the root of all evil thing. Apparently, it's scripts.
Well, I think that might be a good. We ran a little overtime. I got to wrap this up. But
I want to throw in one thing.
Go ahead, Mitch.
I think this is similar to the debate in security, not software security, which is a defense or as a response, right? We're never going to perfect not putting vulnerabilities in software, period. It's a flawed process. It's just not possible to be 100%, no security vulnerabilities. The other side of the coin is response. How quickly can we patch it? How quickly can we fix it and roll that out everywhere? I think that's what we need to focus on also. So the problem is it's all these, XZ modules that are living out there that are easy to update. And if we make that update process much easier to roll out, when there is a situation, they won't get the publicity that it is. So it's going to happen. So let's respond much more effectively.
Yeah. Rapid response and apply chaos engineering.
Then.
Absolutely. All right. We got to wrap up Techstrong, gang. I hope you have a great Monday. Come back tomorrow. where Tracy leads the French Revolution against the script monarchy. Off with their heads. Let them eat cake. All right. Mike, Tracy, Mitchell, thanks for joining us. Thank you for watching us. This is Techstrong Gang. We'll be back tomorrow with more.
Hey guys, this is JJ Manila with Mitch Ashley, co-host of CISO Talk, where we have engaging, bite-sized conversations for current and next-gen CISOs.
You know, we have some of the best conversations on CISO Talk with some of the greatest talent in security. People like Andy Ellis, who talked to us about optimizing security strategies and how to navigate the boardroom. Lisa Bradley came on and talked about vulnerability management, bug bounty programs, and why S-bombs aren't the solution to all your software security problems. Steve Reynolds was also another great guest, and he talked to us about what not to do when a security incident happens.
The what not to do's are great, but we also had Eve Mailer and Steve Bitton on talking about security and third-party software, SaaS applications, and weaponizing AI. So go ahead and join us for the latest episode of CISO Talk. You can find us by going to techstrong.tv/CISO Talk.